Hi everyone. Welcome to the second online lecture on logical fallacies, informal logical fallacies. Last time we ended with this question: why should we care about logical fallacies? And I asked you to respond in a online discussion assignment, which many of you did. There were a lot of different answers, a lot of great answers. A lot of them seemed to be in some of these categories or fit under these statements. One, we want to avoid committing errors in our own reasoning. So making sure that when we're explaining something or we're arguing for something, that we are ourselves not using logical fallacies. We also want to avoid being taken in by errors of reasoning that other people make, even if they're not intentional. So we don't want to be fooled or persuaded by fallacious reasoning or by fallacies. We want to make sure that we are convinced only when we have good reasons to believe a conclusion. And of course, just knowing them means that we won't be fooled by them. So that's why we want to be able to become familiar with them. So in this lecture, we're going to actually start learning about some specific informal logical fallacies. They fall under four various categories: fallacies of relevance, presumption, induction, and ambiguity. And all of these will be explained in due course. Today, we're going to be talking about the fallacies of relevance, and there are three of them: appeal to force, appeal to pity, and ad hominem. And ad hominem also has two types, and we'll go over both of those. So, appeal to force. If you see this comic, Snoopy Peanuts comic, Charlie Brown is saying to Lucy, "Well, I appreciate the help you've given me. I was wondering if I should get a second opinion." And Lucy says, "Only if you don't mind my beating you over the head with that stool you're sitting on." And Charlie Brown is convinced that, okay, I guess first opinions are pretty good. Uh, Obviously, this is pretty simplistic, but you get the idea that Charlie Brown was wondering if he should get a second opinion. Lucy didn't really give him a good reason why he should or shouldn't get a second opinion. She just threatened him with beating him over the head with a stool. So, an appeal to force fallacy involves the threat of physical or psychological harm, so some sort of harm, and it occurs when the arguer substitutes the threat for any real evidence that would support the conclusion. So here, Lucy doesn't give a reason for why Charlie Brown should or shouldn't get a second opinion. She just threatens him. Here's another couple of examples. So perhaps an attorney would say to a jury, "You must find this man guilty of murder. If you fail to do this, then when he gets out, he will kill again, and it may be you or someone you love, or care about." Sorry, a couple of typos. I'll fix those. And the second example: "I deserve an A in this class. If I don't get an A, then my dad, who is the dean, will remember this when you come up for tenure." Again, another couple typos. I'll fix it. So in both of these, the attorney is not giving a reason why the man should not be found guilty of murder. He's just sort of threatening that if you don't do this, well, he'll get out and he might kill someone that you love. That could be true, but that's still not a reason to find him guilty. You have to find him guilty if he's actually guilty, and you need to give evidence for that, not just threaten something, that could happen in the future. If this would be different, for example, if he were already found guilty and people were trying to decide what the punishment should be, then you can make a reasonable statement like, well, if you only give him 5 years, then when he comes back out, he might be of harm to society. Well, that's relevant to what's going on. To find someone guilty or not, though, you have to do that based on actual evidence, not just being scared that this person might do something when you don't even know if they're actually guilty of murder. And then in the second one, the student is saying, well, if you don't give me an A, sort of threatening that your job may be at risk because my dad's your boss. Okay. So I think you pretty much understand that it's sort of like a threat. Things, though, that involve a threat of force aren't necessarily always this appeal to force fallacy. Let's watch this short clip by President Obama from 2012.
We have been very clear to the Assad regime, but also to other players on the ground that a red line for us is we start seeing a whole bunch of chemical weapons moving around or being utilized. That would change my calculus. That would change my equation.
Okay. So he's talking about what the US would do in Syria, and what President Obama was saying at that time was if Syria used chemical or biological weapons, it might make the US go in and use force. Now, there is a threat of force here, but he's giving reasons that are relevant, saying that if there is something that threatens the population, we may have to use force to protect the Syrian population. So that's just not a random threat of force to force them to do something that's irrelevant to what's being talked about. This is an instance where that force would be used to prevent the harm caused by a certain action. So this is not a fallacy. And like I gave the other example of the sentencing, not everything that involves a threat of force is necessarily a fallacy. It's only if it's not relevant to what you're talking about. So when you think about appeal to force, and when you think about an argument someone is making, you're wondering if it's an appeal to force. Think, is the threat of harm substituted for genuine evidence? Is the threat of force relevant to the conclusion? Or does the evidence actually support the conclusion? If the threat of force is substituted for genuine evidence, and if that is not relevant to the conclusion, and there's no evidence to support the conclusion, that means the argument here is a fallacy. If, however, they're not substituting this for genuine evidence, the threat, if the threat of force is actually maybe relevant to the conclusion, and if the evidence does support the conclusion, then it's a legitimate argument. You don't have an example of a fallacy. Okay? So again, in all these cases, you just need to see, are they substituting evidence with something else? In this case, a threat of force. You'll have an opportunity to practice some of these, but we're going to move on to the next fallacy. This next one is called appeal to pity. You will recognize it. Let's watch this video first.
Please, go ahead, Mr. Quagmire.
Look, I know everyone's sitting out there judging me today, but before you do, please know I had it pretty rough growing up. My dad was a military man, so he wasn't around much. And my mom, well, let's just say she was a little promiscuous. In fact, I think my problem started the day I was born.
Mr. Quagmire, your story is a sad one, but that doesn't excuse your actions. I have no choice but to sentence you to 20 years in prison.
Okay. So in this clip, I guess there's some background information. I don't really watch the show, but they have a lot of examples of logical fallacy. So in this case, he's being charged with a crime. I think it was statutory rape. And then he starts talking about these things. So an appeal to pity occurs when the arguer, instead of providing genuine evidence for the conclusion, attempts to get the conclusion accepted by evoking pity from the listener or the reader. The pity substitutes for the evidence. So in this case, he's not saying why he's not guilty of the crime. He's trying to get people to feel sorry for him and then let him off the hook for his crime. Again, if this were a case where somebody was found guilty of the crime, and then they say some evidence to show why their sentencing should be lighter or why maybe they deserve to get some therapy instead of jail time, that's relevant. In this case, he's saying this Mr. Quagmire is trying to say that he shouldn't be found guilty of this crime because of this backstory. But the only reason you shouldn't be found guilty of a crime is if you didn't actually do it. So that's why in this case, it's a fallacy. Here's another example. A teenager might say to a highway patrolman, "Please, sir, don't give me a ticket for speeding. If you do, then my parents won't let me drive the car, and then I won't be able to take my girlfriend to the prom, and that would break her heart. She spent all her money on a new dress, and this is her last chance to go because we're graduating this year, and she didn't get to go last year because her mom was in the hospital." Like, he's really laying it on thick here. And he says, "I promise I've learned my lesson." Again, the only reason you shouldn't get a ticket is if you didn't do the crime, right? It's up to the police officer. They could obviously excuse the person or whatever, and maybe they would. But this person isn't making a good logical argument for why they shouldn't get a ticket. The only good logical argument for that would be they weren't actually speeding. All right. Another example is if a college student says to the teacher, you can read the details here. But if you failed me and now I won't be eligible to play soccer and I'll lose my athletic scholarship and I won't be able to continue to go to school without it. Won't you let me make up the work and retake the final? So they're making this argument that they should be able to make up the work and retake the final after the teacher had given multiple warnings and multiple chances and the person didn't put in the work. The teacher may take pity on her and may give her those options, but what she's really doing is giving reasons that don't support the conclusion. She's really just trying to elicit the emotions of the teacher, hoping that'll be persuasive. And emotions do tend to be very persuasive, which is why people use them, but they're not actual reasons, logical reasons that support the conclusion. Okay. Now, sometimes you may have something that is appealing to people's sense of sympathy, and it may not be an appeal to pity. So let's look at this portion of this ad. We won't watch the whole thing.
I will be the answer at the end of the line. I will be there for you. Why take the time?
Okay, so this goes on a little bit, and then
I will be your solid.
let's see.
Please say you'll be the answer for an innocent animal who is suffering right now. An animal who needs your help. Please.
Okay, so perhaps this commercial lays it on pretty thick, but I don't know if this would technically be called an appeal to pity fallacy. Like, yes, they're appealing to your sympathetic feelings, and they want you to feel sorry for these animals. At the same time, that feeling is relevant to what they're asking you to do. They're asking you to help those animals and to take care of them. And the only reason someone would do that is if they felt compassion towards those animals. And so they are actually providing reasons why, and it makes you feel sad, but it's just the reasons are sad. Now they put the music and they put all that, so maybe all that sort of exaggerates it and could sort of move it towards an appeal to pity. But strictly from the point of view of appealing to your feelings, that's the whole point of why you would help these animals, as opposed to the student, where it's not like the student comes to you and says, I'm very hungry and I don't have a lot of food. Do you think you could provide me some food? Instead, the student was saying, well, I'm going to lose my scholarship and whatever. So can you please, change your policies and let me do all this, make up the exam and do all this other stuff when all those chances were given, right? So they just want to make the teacher feel sorry for her in order for her to just sort of gain her own, achieve her own goals in terms of her scholarship and soccer and whatever. But it's not giving good reason for why she didn't do the work and why she should be given another chance. So again, another little checklist. Have pathetic circumstance, and pathetic here is not meant to be an extreme word, but sort of pathetic in the sense of sympathy or empathy, like you're feeling sorry for this person. So have pathetic circumstances been substituted for genuine evidence? Is the arguer trying to hook your emotions in order to get you to accept the argument? Does the evidence support the conclusion? So if the circumstances have substituted genuine evidence, if they want to hook your emotions to accept an argument, but they have not provided any evidence for the conclusion, then that, of course, is a fallacy. If, however, they have not done that, and they're not trying to just hook your emotions to accept an argument, but they provide evidence to support a conclusion, then that is a legitimate argument. Okay, so I'm going to pause this video